Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first episode of Redistricting Radar in the new year. We're very excited to be bringing back one of our favorite shows from last year into the new year. And we have a jam-packed episode tonight, our New Year's special. It's a bit late for New Year's, but we're going to be talking about four states tonight. This is a follow-up to our Kansas, Indiana, Iowa special we did for Christmas. And we're going to be discussing Maryland, Maine, Kentucky, and Louisiana. So our first state up is going to be Kentucky. Eric's going to be giving us a rundown of all the redistricting rules tonight for each state. We're hopefully going to get to show a couple maps from each of us. We've got Jared Stone, a regular contributor with us, myself, along with Eric Cunningham, our regular guest. And hopefully soon we're going to be able to bring on Armin Thomas as well, who's been doing quite a few interesting articles for us and should be on later in the night. So without further ado, let's get into Kentucky. Eric, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, so Kentucky is actually a fairly interesting state in redistricting. It's obviously a very, very Republican state. This is one of the most Republican states in the country, and it's one that Democrats are going to. They really only have room to fall here in terms of the margins that can be seen in some of these rural counties. This is a state that Donald Trump won by 26 percentage points this time, 62 to 36. That's Biden improved over around 4%, mainly because of overperformances in some of the urban areas. But Democratic support is really only concentrated in a few areas. Right now, their congressional map is a 5-1 map for Republicans. It used to be a 4-2 map at the start of the decade. Democrat Ben Chandler held one of the districts. It was actually drawn to support him long term, but he fell after only one term under this new map, and it stayed Republican ever since. So I'll go ahead and show you the current Kentucky map, and then we can go over why Kentucky is going to be a state to look at this cycle, because it's almost guaranteed that Democrats will be losing their only seat in the state, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. I mean, if we're being honest. So this is Kentucky right now. So as you can see over here, 6 congressional districts. They're drawn in a strange way. A lot of this is incumbent protection. A lot of this is some other things. Keep in mind, this was drawn by a Democratic legislature at the time. Kentucky had a Democratic House of Representatives as recently as a few elections ago. And it's only recently that Kentucky has become really, really Republican at the statewide level. So these are the districts, and they make sense if you look at the incumbents. So obviously the first one stretches from places like, from, I think it has Paducah in
Can
here.
you click on the map real quick? Because I know where the
Yeah.
incumbents live,
Yeah,
so I can help
it's
out.
got Paducah. It's got
Yeah,
Paducah,
he
Henderson.
lives in Monroe County right there. I think that's what it says. Right there in the
Yeah,
corner, right
he lives
side.
all
He
the way
lives right
over
there.
here. Yeah.
Versus
So you
number
can
Okay,
see,
yeah.
yeah.
two, where he lives in Bowling Green. So
Yeah, you can see why this is a problem. So this is drawn partially for that. The fifth is obviously Hal Rogers, the powerful, longtime Republican legislature. This is coal country. It's a weird mix of ancestrally Republican counties and ancestrally Democratic counties. A lot of these counties have been Republican since the Civil War, and a lot of these have only been Republican fairly recently.
the best example is Elliott County, just for the viewers.
Yeah,
If you know anything about
yeah,
Elliott County, Trump essentially broke the Democratic streak they had going there since Reconstruction back in 2016. It
mhm,
went from it voted for Obama heavily in 2008, narrowly in 2012, but it was like a 6-point Obama victory to ridiculous, like a 45-point Trump victory in 2016, and then it just got
mhm.
redder this time around. It was one of
And
the
it even voted for Mitch
counties out
McConnell,
there
which,
to
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
it never voted for Mitch McConnell. I mean, this is a county, keep in mind, that voted for Allison Grimes in 2014, and she lost the Senate race by a pretty large margin as well.
Yeah. And the other ones, the sixth is home to Andy Barr. He is from Lexington, which is the second largest city in Kentucky, if I recall right. It also has Frankfort, some other areas. The fourth is home to Thomas Massey, the libertarian firebrand. He lives somewhere over in Lewis County, I believe over in Maysville. This also has some Cincinnati suburbs, Louisville. Part of the debate over Kentucky is whether it is a southern state. Out of respect, I will not comment on this debate, but I will mention that you'll notice here a lot of the population lives along this border area with Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and Illinois. It's very, very much adjacent to the Midwest in a lot of ways, while also having a lot of Southern tendencies and being grouped with the South in a lot of ways. So,
I
obviously,
briefly
this is
want to
just, yeah.
mention something, if that's okay, about
Oh, yeah, go right ahead.
The fourth district with Massey. So, looking at traditionally the second Democratic seat, the one that the Democrats drew, was the
Mhm.
Ben Chandler seat in the sixth district, and Chandler was an oddity. He survived in 2010. Most Democratic
Mhm.
incumbents lost in 2010, but Chandler narrowly survived in 2010. And Andy Barr challenged him again in 2012 in a slightly different district, as you can see there, and he won. So Chandler couldn't hold on to a seat that was drawn for him. So you see a plight that's kind of similar to the plight that struck the Arkansas Dems when they drew a map that was designed to maintain their supremacy, and they ended up seeing all three of their congressional seats gone, essentially after 2010, going forward past 2012, when Mike Ross inevitably retired to run for governor, and he lost that bid. So my point about the fourth is actually turning into a seat that on paper could have some trends in the future if they keep the map roughly similar. They could yield it not to the Democrats, obviously, but to be more competitive than something like the sixth. Because if you look at those counties, the Cincinnati suburbs up there, if you want to look at the counties, yeah, you've got Campbell, Kenton, and Boone. I mean, that area really helped break for Bashir in his gubernatorial election. And even though Bashir did well in traditionally Democratic areas too, the Democrats definitely have had some positive signs up there. Where those counties essentially turned against Matt Bevin. And, if they want to look for a place to be competitive in the future, the fourth district, even though it's going to change form, that could be a place to do it.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you also got Oldham County there, it's the wealthiest county in Kentucky. In fact, it's one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. And like other counties, it's seen a little bit of a shift towards the Democratic Party in recent presidential elections. Keep in mind, when people think of Kentucky, they often, unfortunately, think of it in stereotypes about poverty or coal fields or anything along that line. But most of the population is actually centered around Louisville, around Lexington, and around places like Oldham County that have a lot of old money that are very much, pretty well off. Oldham is,
and it's true. Oldham swung 10 points to the left between this presidential election and the last one.
Yeah. I mean, this is a county, it still went 59-38 for Trump, but it is in terms of, it's similar to some of those counties in the exurbs of Northern Virginia that still are stubbornly Republican to a degree, but have a fairly high income level, which makes them on the long term of a solid.
I know, but that's why it's solid, because that fourth district, you have Campbell, Kenton, and Oldham, all of which, mind you, as I said, are still Republican counties, unless you're counting the gubernatorial election.
Yeah.
But when you look at those counties versus a county like Elliott, those show better signs for the Democrats going forward.
Mm-hmm. And also keep in mind that historically, Louisville hasn't been a Democratic stronghold. Mitch McConnell is from Louisville. That's where he was.
Had a
Republican
representative in Congress and Northrop until 2006.
Yeah, and she was. This is even.
Yarmouth,
this is even.
Current representative won in 26, beat a Republican.
Yeah, this was even. I mean, she even survived it being won by Kerry, the county being won by John Kerry. So Kentucky is a very interesting state to look at. And one factor I want to mention here, which is very important, is their redistricting laws and their redistricting structure. So I'm going to show you the political party strength in Kentucky, which kind of gives you an idea of what the problem for Democrats is. I'm going to go all the way back here. Notice one thing in common here. Democrats have controlled the Kentucky House from 1922 all the way until 2016. That is a long, long, long time. And that gave them substantial say over redistricting, even as Republicans have held the state Senate for the entirety of the 2000s. If you look at this right here. So it's a really, really important factor that Republicans now have it. And it's not only that they have the House, it's that they have it by a landslide margin, 75-25. That's 75% of the vote. That's enough to overcome a gubernatorial veto. Same thing in the state Senate, 30-8, over 70%. This is a really, really bad situation for Democrats. Even though Andy Bashir is the governor of Kentucky, he has very little actual power in terms of averting a veto at this point. His chances of being reelected when that time comes are relatively narrow because of the unpopularity of Matt Bevin, the Republican governor who preceded him, being one of the main reasons that he lost reelection. So going into this is important because in theory, Kentucky has rules over their congressional districts. It's not really been rules so much as it's been general guidelines that have been adopted by the legislature. These guidelines were that counties should not be split unless necessary. Now, obviously, if counties cannot be split, that means you can't split Louisville, which means a seat in Louisville is always going to be Democratic, which means even though that district isn't that Democratic, relatively speaking, it's not an overwhelmingly It is very Democratic, but it's not overwhelmingly progressive. It's resulted in John Yarmouth being perhaps the most progressive Democratic representative in the South, or what I would call South adjacent areas. He is a progressive firebrand. He is known for his support for progressive and liberal causes, which has resulted in him being very unpopular with the Republicans of Kentucky. So the Republican control of the legislature is important because they can not only get past Andy Beshear's veto, they can also change those general guidelines that have been adopted by the legislature that county splitting should be avoided. And I think they likely will. I think there's very little reason to assume that they will be kind to Democrats in redistricting. They're actually meeting and have been meeting to strip Andy Beshear of his emergency powers. That gives you an idea of what they're thinking of state Democrats. They're not fine with them being a 25% minority. They want to stamp them out. They want the Democratic Party in Kentucky to become irrelevant. And one of the ways to do that is to make a 6-0 delegation. So I think all of our maps that we're going to show you, the Republican gerrymanders at least, will follow that trend of being a 6-0 map. Because Kentucky is guaranteed to have a 6th congressional district this cycle. So with that out of the way, unless anyone has any other comments, we can go ahead and start showing our maps of Kentucky. I have 2. I think everyone here probably has 2 maps that will probably be somewhat similar to some degree. So whoever wants to go first, I can go first if need be. We can just kind of go ahead and start showing our maps.
I'll go first if that's okay.
Yep, you go ahead.
All right.
And
So
the differences are what's going to be important here. That's what you're going to want to pay attention to because there's a lot of ways you can do this.
Yeah, so I did 2 maps. First, I did a map that basically looks like what we have now, the unlikely scenario in which Kentucky keeps its current composition, so the Democrats get to keep their 3rd district seat. Really not much change here at all. It just protects the incumbency of the current 5 Republican incumbents. So there truly isn't that much change at all on this map. I mean, it's incredibly similar to the current map. The only other seat that Democrats could possibly make a run at is 6, but it's still a Trump plus 16 seat, so it's not a seat that would be easy for them to win. Even 4, which has had some, as I said, Democratic trends, is still heavily Republican here. Clinton couldn't even break 30% of the vote. So again, this is not the most interesting map. And then here I have my gerrymander, which I call my wacky mander because I like it. So 1 and 2 pretty much stay the same to protect Republican incumbents because where they live plays an important role. So you've got an incumbent here that lives in Monroe, but the other incumbent lives over in Warren County, which if you look at these seats, Bowling Green there, feel like someone else saying that city over there because I'll forget city names randomly while I'm redistricting. 5 pretty much remains roughly the same here. The Hal Rogers seat, Hal Rogers is an institution, not much changing here. 6, similar to the current seat, except it moves up and takes in some of the territory in Eastern 4. 6 here is not going to flip to a Democrat. If you look at the totals, it's roughly R plus 20 in terms of margin, about a 19-point spread for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. Obviously, we can expect that to be shrunk down a little bit this election against Biden, but I'd still estimate probably 14, 15 points for the Republicans, something that's not easy to flip. The 4th up here, cornered off, slightly closer. It could dummy mander, but I doubt it will dummy mander unless there's rapid change that we do see in Oldham County over here and in the remainder of the Cincinnati area. But for the decade, I think it will last. And it's currently about a Trump plus 10 seat. And then the 1 seat that was somewhat competitive. And keep in mind, I pretty much drew this in like 10 minutes, so I didn't put that much thought into it. So yes, I'll admit that this map is dumb. It's probably dummy mander and it looks wacky, but my goal was to split the Louisville Metro and dilute Democratic support. But I'm sure that my colleagues here will have better proposals. I really did not put as much thought into this map as the other ones, but essentially, this draws 3 and 4 into what are essentially Trump plus 10 seats, and then about a Trump plus 20 seat out in 6 and 2 safe seats elsewhere. So in most years, this would probably elect a 6-0 delegation. It would be very, very hard for a Democrat to win either of these three seats in a normal year. And obviously, Andy Bashir's performance is not indicative of a normal Democratic performance in Kentucky.
I'll go ahead and show mine now as well. Mine's a little bit different. They take a different approach in terms of drawing. I don't focus on incumbent protection when I'm drawing my maps, aside from my gerrymanders, where I try to keep incumbents protected where possible for obvious reasons. So this is my fair map right here. And it's very similar to the current map in some ways, but obviously it's not going out of its way to protect incumbents. So if you actually look at it here, two Republicans are double bunked into two. This is because, frankly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have it geographically, but it kind of straddles the metro. Bowling Green is kind of kept separate from some of these other surrounding metropolitan areas, mainly to keep them whole. 5 is the entire eastern Kentucky coal field, with the exception of a couple precincts in this county up here. Obviously, very, very Republican district. 6 kind of becomes more geographically compact, centered around Louisville, around Frankfort, and then these other smaller cities around here. 4 straddles the Louisville metro, Cincinnati metro, and also these areas around Ohio, kind of coal country. And then finally, 3 is obviously the Democratic vote sink. It's a seat Hillary Clinton won by around 16. Biden probably won by about 18 or 20. Democratic seat that John Yarmouth would have no issues winning. If you look at the votes here, the 6 is interesting because, like the current one, this is a Trump plus 15 seat, but it's also one the Jim Gray, the Democratic Senate nominee in 2016, would have won by 3 points. Andy Bashir would have actually won the seat by around 13 points, and the Republican Attorney General nominee would have only won it by around 3 points in 2019. If you shade by governor, obviously Andy Bashir does not win a majority of seats, but he comes very close to some degree in 4, which has Oldham County, has some of these suburban areas. Obviously, 3 and 6 are the vote sinks. 5 is the most Republican here, and then you have these other 2 down here. My gerrymander is much more interesting because I went all out. This is an incumbent protection map. It's also a get rid of John Yarmouth map. So Louisville was cracked to hell here, to put it bluntly.
Wow, you were much meaner than I was.
Yeah,
I only split it twice.
Yeah. I split Louisville 5 ways, and I think that is necessary to prevent a dummy mander. If you look at the votes, all of these seats are Trump plus 20, which is really, really, really good for Republicans. But also all incumbents are protected. And you notice the first right here, the first is protected. This county right here is kept in, and it stretches all the way to Louisville. You'll notice how I cracked it up here. Each area kind of gets a portion of the blue areas, mainly 1, 2, and 6, or sorry, 1, 2, and 5 both get them. Obviously, 5 is interesting here because it kind of splits the coal field up. 5 is very, very Republican. It would have been a little bit more competitive, and it would have been won by Andy Bashir in 2019. But that's kind of the nature of these sorts of maps. And then obviously the new seat would be the third, not the thirds, yeah. The 6th now stretches from Lexington into the coal fields, which means the 6th is no longer competitive. It wouldn't have even been close in the Senate race in 2016. And then the 3rd goes from Louisville into the coal fields as well. And then the 4th takes in these northern areas of Louisville. I'm not sure which precinct Mitch McConnell lives in Louisville, but he'll be very, very happy regardless of who it is, unless he happens to be in Thomas Massey's district. In a closer election, though, this sort of map could backfire. But you'll notice right here, though, it still was very, very Republican, even in the AG race, which was a fairly close race overall. The most Democratic district in the state would actually be the 6th, because it takes yeah, it's very ironic, but that's just because Lexington is a pretty blue city now. And so this one's the only one that's within 10 points in the AG race. And then the governor race, the map just kind of implodes. And you'll notice here that these 2 seats right here are the Republican, or the second most Republican, basically, beyond these 2. This one going through Louisville right here is also a very, very more Democratic. And then finally, the most is, again, oddly enough, that 6th.
Well, you can't use the governor one because my gerrymander implodes under the governor, too.
Yeah, keep in mind that Andy Bashir only won that by 5 points. So, the votes are very spread out here. Democrat would have a very hard time.
It's a lot like Joe Manchin winning re-election to the Senate in all 3 congressional districts, but only by a small amount statewide.
Yeah. And what I find actually interesting here is in the Senate race in 2016, the only district that Rand Paul would have won by 20 points is actually Thomas Massey's district. It actually does have a lot of libertarian tendencies if you're looking at who it's supporting. People tend to think Thomas Massey is a poor fit for Kentucky. Again, they're based on these assumptions that everyone in Kentucky is a poor coal farmer and that there's no way they could support libertarianism. But if you look at this right here, Rand Paul did the very best in the 4th district, which stretches basically coincides with Thomas Massey's district with just a little bit more in Louisville. So those are my maps. Obviously, very, very aggressive Republican gerrymander. But the interesting thing, though, is aside from the Louisville split, only 2 other counties are split. So Louisville is split, but only a couple other ones actually meet that same fate. So a good map for Republicans there.
You ready to share, Jared?
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's see if this works. All right. Can you see?
Yes, we can see. There we go.
Great. Okay. So this is my first map. You can see that every district was Trump plus 20 at least. So John Yarmouth doesn't have anything here. He's gone. I mean, that's not really a surprise. Jefferson County split up 4 ways, I believe. We can check on that. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think this is be an effective hold. I don't think that there's going to be any chance of this to backfire at all. I protected incumbents. That's why you see sort of this weird dip down in the 2nd district with Bowling Green, because that's where Brett Guthrie lives. And then you have to go over to Tompkinsville to get for the 1st district right over here, because that's where the incumbent lives. So again, incumbency protection. A few things to note is that sort of the integrity of Massey's district is pretty much the same. You can see that it takes in these 3 northern counties right over here that are sort of the Cincinnati suburbs and exurbs. There's sort of the spiral thing around Lexington because, it actually has a considerable number of Democratic votes. So you have to make sure that that's not going to be an issue. Here, Andy Barr's district is the 6th. It's the green one right here. You can see that he won it by Trump won it by over 20 points in 16. I deliberately try to bring in Frankfort, Georgetown, and at least part of Lexington. I feel like as far as communities of interest, those are fairly similar. One other thing I'll note before showing you how the result plays out in different races is that the 3rd district right here, which Yarmouth is effectively not going to be able to win anymore, I drew it to not take in the city of Louisville, but to take in some ancestral Democratic areas. So you can see it runs through Floyd County, Elliott County, which have been sort of this, prototypical ancestrally Democratic coal field area. It runs down along the West Virginia border, which still, I think, emulates that distinct identity. You can see it goes to Pike County right over here. And so an interesting thing about this is that when you look at some of the other races, like, for example, Senator 2016, this is one of the more marginal seats, is the one that I was just talking about. But obviously, the Senate 2016 race was sort of an anomaly. You're not going to really have that appear anytime soon. But when you look at the governor race, this is actually the most Democratic seat. And this is because Andy Beshear was able to recoup some of those losses among the ancestrally Democratic areas, the coal fields of Eastern Kentucky. You can see that Massey seat right up here is not even the most Democratic seat. So yeah, Democrats are making gains there, but it's still a rock-ribbed Republican seat, and it's not going to flip anytime soon. So the next map, the final map for Kentucky, I have to warn you, it is pretty egregious. So I'll just let you have a look. Yeah. So it's ridiculous, and I know it's a complete eyesore, but I did it to get.
What's going on there near Lexington?
Yeah, so Lexington, it's really carved up. I try to have
contiguous. Is that contiguous?
It is contiguous. Actually, if you look at some of like this area is contiguous. If you go down, you see it has a little bridge. But yeah, it's a really ridiculous map. I drew it just to sort of show some of the areas or hubs of Democratic strength. This district in Louisville that goes up to the Cincinnati suburbs, I mean, it's probably not one that a progressive firebrand like Yarmouth would want to have, but it's one that I believe would stay comfortably within the Democratic column, barring any sort of wave. And then this other district, I would say it's potentially like a Jim Gray district. I mean, it goes from the suburbs of Louisville up to the suburbs and then down over to Lexington. It takes in Frankfort. and it is a marginally
What are the
Democratic.
presidential numbers on that second district?
So we go over there. You see, it's like 0.1 for Clinton, but Biden would do considerably better here. He really dominated in Fayette County, so this would be a more Democratic seat. The rest of that, so the reason I have this ugly thing sticking out here is because this takes in some of these more ancestrally Democratic areas, like going into Bath and Rowan. Elliott, it's just so far gone for Democrats now. I mean, Trump got like 72% of the vote there. It's just not feasible anymore. But this is, I know it's totally ridiculous. I mean, but it really shows you, I mean, you can't make two comfortably Democratic seats out of Kentucky anymore. And in fact, one, I think, as we all showed with our maps, one is pretty much out of the question because Republicans don't need to harbor that Democratic strength in Louisville anymore.
What did this, or was that, sorry, I was just curious. I figured none of the other seats would have voted for Bashir, but I was curious how much better he did in those seats.
You know what? I can check. Let's see. So it's still 4-2 for the incumbent governor, Matt Bevin. But I mean, some of them are more marginal. Like Southern Kentucky is still really safe. I mean, that's ancestrally speaking one of the safest Republican areas in the country. But I mean, it's still a 4-2 map, so it does hold in that sense.
Well, that's good. I guess we'll move on to Louisiana. So do you want to real quick explain Louisiana, and then I'll share my map, Eric?
Yeah, so Louisiana is another interesting one. Louisiana is mainly interesting because of its governor. The governor of Louisiana currently is a Democrat, John Bel Edwards, which means that Democrats could potentially have some say in redistricting going forward. One area of complaint for Louisiana Democrats for a long time has been the lack of a second district. Louisiana currently has 6 congressional districts, and it's a 5-to-1 delegation. In theory, you could draw a map that would support 2 Democratic congressional districts, which is something they've been complaining about for a very long time and have tried to argue on VRA grounds, an argument that has basically been failed. Attempts to make a second VRA seat have been struck down in the 90s because it was egregious and ugly. And the declining population in New Orleans has really made it a challenge for Democrats to do that. But the likelihood that John Bel Edwards will push for this is fairly high. The problem is that he may not have the support of the legislature. So if you look at the Louisiana, the Senate is Republicans have enough votes there to overcome a veto by John Bel Edwards. The House is a little bit unusual because they may not have the votes. You need 2/3 of the votes to overcome a veto in the Louisiana House, and Republicans only have 64% of seats. They have 66 out of 105. Another 2 seats are held by independents, who are potentially at risk, obviously, in re-election. And then there's another 35 seats that are held by Democrats, some of whom are in rural conservative areas. The likelihood that their conservative-leaning voters would be happy about a seat for a more liberal Democratic candidate being pushed for is fairly high. A lot of these candidates may have their own self-interest in mind when it comes to this sort of thing. But obviously, I think John Bel Edwards will at least try to do this, similar to how in Maryland, as we'll explain later, Larry Hogan is trying to do things as well. Currently, Louisiana does have a Republican delegation. Louisiana has had a 5-to-1 delegation for the entirety of the 2000s, the 2010s. One thing that was unusual is that in 2008, it did have a 6-to-1 delegation, if I recall right, because the Republican won the New Orleans district in an epic fluke that will never be repeated.
Joseph Cal.
Yeah. The problem is that there was a moderate conservative Democrat representing one of the rural districts. So even though Republicans won impossibly the New Orleans district, they managed to lose, not be able to win one of those other districts. So their clean sweep was basically defeated. So I'll go ahead and show you the history of Louisiana's maps and then the current map very briefly, because there are 2 vacancies that are, but one of which has been caused by opportunity and the other by misfortune. So obviously Louisiana has been an unusual state. Up until like the 1980s, there were literally no Republicans in the legislature, which means their maps were drawn entirely by Democrats. As the years have gone on, Republicans have taken over the legislature and been more consistent in winning statewide races. So the maps have changed a little bit. One unusual thing, which you'll notice, is connecting these northern areas across the bay right here to the New Orleans area. This is arguably contiguous and has been ruled as contiguous because there's a bridge one of the longest bridges in the world that combines these two areas. These are affluent Republican areas that are generally being connected with other New Orleans adjacent areas. In the 1990s, two VRA districts were drawn, one of which was this ugly fourth district, and then the other was the second based in New Orleans. This map was almost immediately struck down and then replaced with this one, which was again a horrendously ugly district that stretched from Baton Rouge all the way to Shreveport, and through another couple of other cities through here. That one was again struck down and finally replaced with this map for the rest of the 2000s. Louisiana's population declined dramatically following Hurricane Katrina because of the tragedy and loss of human life, but also relocations following that, which resulted in them losing a congressional district from the 2000s to the 2010s. And so the current map, drawn by a Republican legislature and signed by a Republican governor, looks like this. It's a pretty ugly map. It really is not a lovely sight. I'm not a huge fan of it, to be honest, because of that weird split with the first district. Obviously, the defining trait here is the second is this super VRA seat that drags in black voters from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. The fifth, the fourth, all these other ones are very Republican. Right now, though, it's hard to talk about incumbents because there are currently two vacancies. The second congressional district has been vacated since the previous Democrat in this district, trying to remember his name,
Cedric Richmond.
Cedric
Richmond, who beat Joseph Cow in 2010 by a large margin, obviously, resigned to take a position in the Biden administration. And then, very sadly, the fifth district was Luke Ledlow was elected to represent this district in a runoff, but then died before he could be seated. He died of COVID-19. Currently, his wife, or his widow, his wife, is running to replace him and has the endorsement of most Republicans. So it's generally assumed she'll be the nominee in this district. But obviously, it's unusual to have a third of the delegation just not existing at the moment because of these vacancies, and so they will be filled eventually. But right now, there are only 4 members out of the 6-member delegation. So I have 2 maps ready for this. I assume most everyone else here has 2 maps ready to go over. I'll start this time since Harrison started last time. I'll go ahead and start with my gerrymander, which is basically the current version of the map. I had to change some things. It looks pretty similar, but the population shifts have resulted in the district looking a little bit different. So obviously very, very similar. 4, 5, and 3 are basically unchanged from the current versions. 1 is also unchanged, and I got rid of the water precincts right here to show you just what is going on here, which is these areas are connected over this gigantic lake right here by this very, very long bridge. And traditionally, those 2 areas have been linked together. Rather than reaching around New Orleans, they go up over here and then grab these swampy areas. I mean, you'll notice the land here is very, very most of the people don't live in this area over here. They live around the city.
Yeah, that precinct, that huge geographic area, that precinct has only 3 people in it.
Yeah, just to show what he's talking about here. I mean,
that one giant precinct one of them has only 3 people living.
Yeah, this one has 86 people. This one has 4 people. Like nobody lives here. Because literally it's swamp. It's just not
literally
livable.
sinking into the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with climate change and rising tides, a lot of these areas will cease to exist in the future if these projections are to be believed. So it kind of stretches around through here. The 6th, again, is very similar to the current one. The current representative lives somewhere in Baton Rouge. I'm assuming he doesn't live in the city, but he lives in these areas down here, which are what is probably will be known in the future as St. George. The residents of this southern area over here, this more Republican-leaning portion of affluent white voters, voted to secede from the rest of Baton Rouge's consolidated city-county government and become their own city, St. George. Obviously, Baton Rouge itself is fighting this. Governor Edwards is not on board with the measure and is not appointed a caretaker mayor to lead the transition here. And also lawsuits are ongoing as to whether or not there was racial gerrymandering at play in drawing the seat. But regardless, this is, again, a very Republican one. 2 is, again, disgusting. It goes all the way up through here. It's 63%
Eric,
black.
if you think that's disgusting, just wait till you see my map.
Yeah, again, and it's hideous. And the result is this map is very, very Republican. If you look at the Senate race, again, very Republican. Go back to 2008. The 4th is a little bit more Democratic here. This is because the 4th has a very, very large black population here. You notice about a third of the seat is black. But racial polarization is so high in this portion of Louisiana that even though 34% of voters are black, only 37% of votes in this district are black. So basically, they're getting almost all of the black voters, but almost none of the white voters. This is a problem for Democrats across the Deep South. And obviously, all incumbents are safe here, although, again, 2 incumbents are not existing at the moment. Luke Letlow, presumably, or Julia Letlow will presumably be living in the same location that her late husband was. And we assume the Democrat from 2 will either come from New Orleans or from Baton Rouge. It would probably be a coup for Baton Rouge Democrats if they get someone from that area. This other alternative is what I'd call a fair map of Louisiana. I got rid of some of the things I really hate with this one, and it's probably a map Democrats would push for but not get. So this is obviously a very different map right here. Cajuns would not be happy because Cajun country is split up here. Predominantly, it's being split into the 3rd and the 1st districts. 4th is, again, it's a little bit more African American here, but it's also not going to vote for a Democrat anytime soon. You'll notice here it's Republican plus 20 seats, so very, very Republican. The 2nd is now purely New Orleans, and it's now only a plurality black seat. This is probably arguable that you could do this because really you can't support an African American district in the New Orleans area, and the VRA does not mandate snake districts. So what this does is it basically just takes in all these Democratic voters right here, as well as these affluent white voters. Yeah, so
That's
that would
very
be
interesting.
that would be a no-go for the people there. Would loathe this. But again, if you're going to draw it, it would not be a good thing for them. But on the other hand, you'll notice these areas are getting bluer because, again, these are affluent suburbs, and affluent suburbs are tending to shift towards the Democratic Party. These precincts in New Orleans proper are also very similar. I'll actually show a map before we move on to our next one. I'll show a map of Louisiana that actually shows how ridiculous voting used to be among here. The 5th is very similar to the current one. Again, the affluent whites would probably not be happy with this because St. George's is not in, and part of St. George's is in this, but most of it is actually in the 6th. So the 5th right here is very, very Republican. This is a Trump plus 50 seat. The 1st is a Trump plus 45 seat right here, basically stretches along all the swamp, New Orleans suburbs, and then some of these areas up here. The 6th is the VRA seat now. It's 49% CVAP black. If I wanted to, I could push it a little bit higher. But you'll notice right here, it's a Clinton plus 14 district. Baton Rouge is sufficiently Democratic at this point to basically carry its own district. And then, yeah, that's basically the story of this map. You have three districts right here, 3, 1, and 5 that are absurdly Republican, 4 that is very Republican, and then 2
How
very
Republican
Democratic
is your
seats.
4? Or how much did your 4 vote for Trump by?
By 18. It's not a district that would flip. It's too much.
What's your
towards
most
Trump.
Republican district?
That would be the 5th, which is, again, the suburban one that stretches from the New Orleans suburbs up here into these Baton Rouge areas over here. And it's a Trump plus 50 district. It's actually shifted left, believe it or not, from 2008 when it was a McCain plus 52 district.
Wait till you see my districts.
Yeah,
Trump plus
and it would have
65.
voted for Kennedy in 2016 by 55 percentage points. Again, these are absurdly Republican suburbs that are shifting ever so slightly. But again, you're shifting from Trump plus 50 to Trump plus 48. Like, there's only so much that can happen there.
I think I broke it. I got a Trump plus 60 district.
Oh, good Lord.
It's like R plus 40.
I know Adam has created one of our editors, Adam Trencher, has created a 4-2 Democratic map that, because of the racial polarization, was basically packs all of the Republicans into these ultra Republican seats. But obviously, Harrison will show his right now.
Well, this is my 5-1 generic map. So not much change here in terms of overall stuff. I mean, the 5th and the 4th do have sizable black populations, pretty much diluted. Overall, my 1 VRA seat is the nice little snake mander here that looks pretty cool. second district, which will be taken over by the successor to Cedric Richmond, but it essentially takes the black population of Baton Rouge and snakes along here into the black population of New Orleans. Some of these more white precincts have been connected via the Lake Pontchartrain Bridge with the first district, so I kept that bridge contiguity there. Not that much change, nothing interesting with this one. If we go over to here, prepare to feast your eyes on the beauty of this map.
Good Lord.
All right. Wow.
Here is
LA compact. Good Lord. What have you done?
well,
That is something.
the compact the compact part is obviously irony, but as you can see, my district blows this one, puts this one to shame.
Yeah. You went from Baton Rouge to Shreveport. I mean,
well, basically the fifth includes every black metro in the whole state. Except
every black voter in the whole state almost. I mean, if you
I think it actually does. Every black voter that's not in Baton Rouge or New Orleans is in this district.
Wow.
No, that's what I did. When I made it, I just went to every precinct that had above 45% black population. But to go to
what is the percentage of the population in the fifth that is black? Because I would assume, I mean, it's obviously over 50%, but how high actually is it?
We'll get to that. First district here, very Republican. I kept the water contiguity here with a
Good
bridge.
grief.
So I followed the exact same thing they did here in the 90s. The same thing. Communities have changed a bit since then. But overall, this is pretty much what it looks like. It takes in these white precincts sandwiched in between black precincts because Louisiana is just that racially polarized if you look at New Orleans. So you've got that. And this seat comes out to a Republican plus 20 seats. So Steve Scalise has got a very safe district to stay with here. The second district, which is beautiful, is the first majority black district, has the highest black population of the two, 66% black. Clinton got 76% of the vote here, so it's Democratic plus 26. Takes in the black parts of New Orleans, and it skims around here, taking in more black precincts, sandwiched essentially in between white precincts. Like, look at this precinct. One of them was 99% black, I think. Makes its way up here to the home of LSU in Baton Rouge and takes in essentially these really heavily African-American precincts in the middle of Baton Rouge and more African-American precincts out here that are often sandwiched in between white precincts. So that is the second district. Again, whoever succeeds Cedric Richmond will have no trouble there. The third district, I believe this is a Clay Higgins seat, runs along the border. Again, very Republican, R plus 24. Not much.
That's Cajun country right there. That is basically the entire heart of Cajun country.
It is. And then 4, the most Republican. This is the one that voted for Trump by 60 points.
Good Lord.
Yeah, so it's like a Trump plus 60 seat. It essentially takes in all of the white voters in northwestern Louisiana, almost every single one of them. I did put one 99% white precinct in LaSalle Parish in with the black district just so they go screaming cowboy because I thought it was funny. But every other white voter in northwestern Louisiana is in the 4th district here, which is ridiculously Republican.
Yeah.
Then we get to my favorite district, the 5th district, which takes in every African-American voter in the state. Finds their way into this district some way or another. It is contiguous. It's 61% black overall and D plus 12 because there are still a few white precincts that got caught up in the mix, but pretty much, I mean, you've got everyone. You've got the Delta blacks, rural black communities out here, Monroe, Bastrop, and then you get big areas like Shreveport. Let's follow the district. It's beautiful. So it starts off down here, all the way here at Lake Charles. Makes its way up the Delta coast, a few tendrils sticking off to pick up some other black communities. Goes up all the way.
I don't see any problems with this. This is very fair.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the most compact districts I've ever seen. Then it goes all the way up along the border, sticks down, goes through Shreveport. Then it's got this beautiful, very large tendril going all the way down to Alexandria. And
Now,
I
see,
mean,
one of my
it's just-
favorite, one of my favorite things to do with districts is give them British naming conventions. I'm not sure what you would call this. This is beautiful.
I'd probably
What
call
would
it
this
the
be?
shit,
What would be Shreveport by Baton Rouge?
probably just call it the shitstorm, or the shouldn't have been made. Then
But
we
yeah,
get to the
that's
sixth
incredible.
district, which is also very, very, very Republican, and it essentially feeds off racial polarization to take in as much in terms of Republican suburbs as are possible. So, I made here, I think, a very fair map. Gives John Bell Edwards and the Democrats the second seat that they've always wanted, and it
Yeah.
allows Republicans to keep a majority. And it's compact, and it makes sure that every voter is represented racially.
I'm sure
Literally.
Adam, if he's watching, is literally screaming, "This is not past the Gingles test by any conceivable stretch of the imagination." But it's a very creative map, to say the least.
Well, no, it clearly is illegal because I drew it solely with racial intent. I literally put every African American voter in Louisiana into one district.
So, what did you draw, Jared? We'll show you, and then I'll show finally the reason this kind of all matters is how absurd Louisiana is in terms of how
Yeah.
to have a map that really adequately shows, if you're not already convinced, how racially polarized and just how bizarre this state is.
Yeah, so I have one map. This is assuming that there are going to be two VRA districts. So this is my map. I think I would say it's a little more neat, if you don't mind me saying.
That's not compact enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some drawbacks to this, but we do have two VRA districts. They both, in terms of their demographics, they sort of fit that.
Yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah, so you sort of have to snake around the Mississippi Delta. You take in Baton Rouge, obviously the sort of southern part here, where it's majority white, majority Republican. You know,
St.
they don't want to
George's,
be in
yes.
this. Yeah, and then you see I have this little cutout of Metairie / Kenner / Jefferson, which is where Scalise lives, because he would not want to be in a blue district for the life of him. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't look that much different than the current one, except for a few minor things. I mean, you see it goes from New Orleans, it goes along the Mississippi River. This is the safety majority black district. Steve Scalise has his first district right over here. Again, he lives in Jefferson, which is in Jefferson Parish, but you can see the bridge that's keeping it contiguous, or at least according to the legal framework there.
And he would keep those wealthy donors from the Baton Rouge and New Orleans area, which is kind of how he's able to raise so much money.
Yeah. So they're able to have I think it's like a 71% for Trump in 16. So it's probably, I don't know, in the high 60s, 2020. One thing that is not ideal about this is that you see that, almost all of, this sort of area of Louisiana, it's all sort of within the district, but Clay Higgins is not within this district. He's from Port Barry, I think, which is up here. He's not within that sort of traditional Cajun area of Louisiana. So that might be a bit of an issue, but you see there's sort of some swaps have to be made because not all the incumbents are obviously there at the moment. So he'll be introduced to new coalitions, new demographics, but still safely Republican, and they'll have to find someone else to represent this area. I mean, it's safely, we can go through, this is senator, president, you can see it's a little more pronounced in terms of the racial polarization, but it's pretty solid. It's not something that's going to be elastic really in any way. I mean, you go to 2008, same thing. So this is one that sticks. I mean, it'll depend, depending on sort of the deflation or the decreasing of the African American population in some of these areas like the Mississippi Delta. That could be a variable factor in the next cycle of redistricting. But at this point, this is a majority black district in every sense of the term. And so this would fit if they were to do something like having two VRA districts in Louisiana.
And don't forget that Trump actually won I believe he won a handful of majority black districts in Mississippi and Arkansas. So even being
Yeah.
majority black at this point may not be enough to secure, at least at the state level. The federal level, this is fine. But if this is just rural, it would be more competitive than it looks on the surface.
Yeah, definitely. And the good thing about this map is that it's anchored by Baton Rouge, which is,
Yep.
a lot of it has trended steadily away from Republicans. So I think that could sort of counteract some less favorable trends to Democrats up here.
Yeah. Yeah, East Baton Rouge Parish used to be very competitive. This is a parish that they're called parishes in Louisiana, not counties. This is a parish that George Bush won in 2004, but I don't think it's gone Republican since. It's gone pretty comfortably into the Democratic column now. There was a contested race for the mayor of the county this cycle, but it was easily won by the incumbent Democrat who was irked some of the affluent white residents in the southern portion of the parish. But before we move on to our next state, I'll just show you. I created this map a while back. I've not ever posted it, but this is basically what Louisiana is like. Just how weird Louisiana is. This is a 52-48 win for Democrats, a 4-point win, but Republicans got very close by only winning a handful of counties, parishes. Namely, this one around Shreveport, but all these ones around New Orleans. You'll notice this right here. These are where the affluent white voters are. Specifically, right here, these portions around here. If some of the other counties around or parishes around New Orleans had flipped, Bobby Jindal would have won this race with only less than a dozen parishes. But obviously, the historic Democratic strength in the Delta, in Cajun country, in a lot of these areas around here, and in New Orleans and itself, is really important. Also, one thing to note is Baton Rouge here is red. It's in the 0 to 10% Republican camp. Now, obviously, it's a very safe Democratic parish. So that's Louisiana. It's going to be one to follow. Democrats have an uphill battle here. I really doubt they get that second district, but they're going to try. They're going to try for it at least. Our next one, I actually don't have a map for because it's so boring. Is Maine.
I think I should just show my map and then we'll move on to Maryland.
Yeah, I want to explain the background of Maine first, though, because it is kind of interesting relatively. Maine is a competitive state federally. It's the most competitive New England state other than New Hampshire. At this point, it's being rather consistently within 10 points. The second is a Republican-leaning congressional district now. Obviously, Democrats have an advantage here, but Republicans have controlled the legislature throughout portions of this decade. They had a Republican governor for a majority of the decade. But ranked choice voting sank their representative in the second district. Bruce Poliquin is now represented by Jared Golden in this Republican district. It went for Trump by around, I think, 7 points, but went for Golden by around 7. And really the only story with Maine is that nothing is going to change really in Maine because nothing can change. According to Maine law, you need 2/3 of the legislature to agree on the map. And there's really not much that's going to happen. I mean, this is the map right now. 1 is Portland. 2 is everything that's not Portland. What that means is that the first is very Democratic and the second is pretty Republican. And you'll notice it's pretty much looked the same forever. And it's really going to look the same this time. So I'll go ahead and let Harrison show his map because the Democrats don't have a 2/3 majority. And so the map is just going to look the same. And Jared Golden may be toast this cycle in a more Republican cycle unless he can find a way to hold on. But it is an unusual situation. It's like New Hampshire. The map has always looked the same because they've never gained or lost a seat. They just have 2 seats, and that's what it's going to look like.
So here's the map. Again, like Eric said, not very much in terms of changes. Wait, sorry, that's confusing. I had the wrong race on.
You had Senator up.
Sorry, you guys were probably wondering.
Republican landslide.
The first district is solid Republican. Yeah, so you've got a solidly Democratic first district. There's only like 1 county split in here, right around here. Let me find where it is again. Yeah, so I split. I'm not even going to try and say that. Whatever. I split that county there, as some of our colleagues would say. And between that, you essentially have a second district that would have voted for President Trump in 2016 and in 2020, and a first district that is fairly Democratic. So there's really not much else to say with Maine. I mean, it's had 2 seats for quite some time. And you got the divide here. So Jared Golden, if there's a good Republican environment and he's challenged by a very strong candidate, Dale Craft's big problem was money. It wasn't that he was a bad candidate. Then no doubt I think he could lose. The district certainly is red enough for him to lose.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Maine is idiosyncratic. There's a lot of French voters, Francophone voters up in the northern portion. The previous governor, Paul LePage, was actually French was his first language, oddly enough. But obviously, and one other thing just before we move on to Maryland, which is kind of the big one here, is that it's not always been that way in Maine. Actually, if you go to 2002, Republicans won the first district pretty much, but lost the second, the rural northern second district. Maine is one of the most rural
Even in
states.
1994, you saw the second district flip to the Democrats and the first flip to the Republicans.
Yeah, Maine it's one of the most rural states in the country. It's one of the it's the whitest state in the country. It's extraordinarily.
You can't make a VRA seat in Maine.
Yeah, you couldn't even. I don't even think there's a majority minority precinct in Maine that's not maybe Native American. But it is a very interesting state, and it's marginally Democratic, but it's pretty stable, and we think it's going to be stable next time. So the big one, obviously, for this cycle is Maryland. Maryland is home to one of the most infamous, congressional gerrymanders out there. It used to be a swing state. It has basically straddles Baltimore, suburban DC. It's become one of the most Democratic states in the country. In fact, I think it was maybe the most Democratic outside of California and a handful of others. It has a Republican governor, but it
Only
probably
Massachusetts and Vermont were slightly more Democratic this cycle.
I mean, it's a very, very strange state as a whole.
Interestingly enough, the three most Democratic states in the nation all have Republican governors.
Yep. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you Maryland. You go back here. Actually, Republican Bush won this in 88. He lost Washington. He lost several other states, but he won Maryland. Since then, it's become very, very Democratic. This cycle, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up real quick because Trump was just demolished in Maryland. I think this is a historic margin. I mean, he just got destroyed here. A 33-point loss. He lost 2 counties in the Eastern Shore. He almost lost a third. You compare this to 2016, which wasn't very good either. He actually lost votes. And in fact, he flipped, Frederick County, which used to be home to what were called Frednecks. Now Frederick County is DC suburbs. It's just not a good state for Republicans at this point. It's very, very bad. You have to go back to 2004 to find the last time there was a competitive federal race. Bush only lost by 13, and then Republicans only lost the Senate race by 10 in 2006. But since then, it's just become a bloodbath for Republicans, with the exception of Larry Hogan, who is one of the most popular governors in the country, but has done very little to improve the Republican fortunes down ballot. Democrats have a supermajority. Their only reason they didn't draw an 8-0 map last time was they wanted to protect their incumbents. This time, it's almost certain they'll draw an 8-0 map. We have probably multiple maps here, but the interesting thing is Larry Hogan is fighting actively. He's made a commission. It doesn't have any legal power, but he has created a commission that will draw proposed maps for Maryland. Will presumably be a 6-2 map, or a 6-2 map with one likely Democratic seat in the Western Shore, the Western Shore of Maryland. But in all likelihood, this is going to be the end for the representative from the first district, Andy Harris, who is in the Republican vote sink right now. I mean, this map is appalling on every level. There's no reason for a lot of these splits.
It's wholly unnecessary. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You can draw a perfectly compact map, as you'll see.
Yeah. When we say this is unnecessary, we literally mean this is unnecessary. The 6th makes sense. It actually almost flipped. But if you look at the 2nd, why is the 2nd like this? It doesn't need to be. Doesn't do anything. It's Democratic. The 3rd is the big one. John Sarbanes wants to run statewide, and so he demanded a district that stretched from Baltimore to Annapolis to the DC suburbs, and he got it. And
basically, it hits all the media markets.
Yeah. The 5th, I really don't like the 5th because it should be a majority black seat, but it's not. It basically was drawn to keep Steny Hoyer in. The 6th is the notorious one. It basically has the 3 rural mountain counties that should be West Virginia, throws in the blue part of Frederick County, and then this big chunk of Montgomery County. And then obviously you have these other ones that are disgusting, but they're not defensible. The 7th, oddly enough, had a congressional race that got a lot of attention. Kim Klacik really kind of beclowned herself after the election, but during the election, she ran a very credible campaign. She ran, I think, double digits ahead of Trump in this district. She actually did a pretty good job. She still lost by like 40 points, but that's a pretty good margin to lose by in Baltimore, of all places. Obviously, look at these historical maps. These are kind of gross, but they have good reason. The first used to stretch across to these rural counties in the western portion of the state, including Charles County, which is now a Democratic majority black county. Back then, it was much more rural. Then you go to this one right here, which I believe Connie Morello represented one of these districts, and she was eventually drawn out. They drew a more Democratic seat to defeat her, and it looked, again, this is totally unnecessary right here. It's just a disgusting map overall. And then finally, 2013, they had a choice to draw out the 6th district Republican or the 1st. In hindsight, they probably would have drawn out the 1st because the 6th district, Roscoe Bartlett, is really a very interesting figure, fairly moderate for a Republican.
Now he lives in the middle of West Virginia in a cabin.
Yeah, he lives in the middle of nowhere and is basically preparing for the apocalypse. I'm not even joking. He's
literally like 93 years old too.
Yeah, he's 93 years old. He's like, he doesn't have electricity, and he's just like going everywhere. I mean, like, he's literally just living as a mountain man. He's doing well for himself. I'll give him, whatever that is. But in hindsight, they would have drawn out Andy Harris because Harris is uniquely offensive to Maryland Democrats. He is a staunch conservative. He hates the District of Columbia and has made efforts to screw over the District of Columbia in every single congressional vote imaginable. And he's very, very just not liked and will be gotten rid of. So I guess we'll let Jared go first since both of us have gone first on our other maps and kind of show what he has made for Maryland, which is, again, a state that's likely going to see the loss of a Republican. And this can be done fairly easily without any need for bizarre lines.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually very simple. But yeah, Andy Harris is pretty much a goner. I mean, after January 6th, then his refusal to certify certain electoral votes, I recall there was a text I was sent to, I think it was a staffer or something like that, and it said 8-0. Basically, it means they're drawing out the sole Republicans. So, I mean, it's pretty much set in stone, the fact that Republicans are not going to have any district here. So I'll show you what I have. I had 2 maps, but the first one is an 8-0 map. You can see that one way to do this is to cut across this gulf right here. I mean, this is just a way to sort of bridge the eastern shore with very democratic areas that are sort of around the DC suburbs. And so you look at these counties right here, like there's Charles County right over here. This is actually one of 2 counties that voted for Al Gore after voting for Bob Dole in 1996. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, it is demographically now virtually, really impossible for Republicans to win it. Even Larry Hogan couldn't win it back in 2018. I drew this with incumbency protection in mind. And so every single district here was drawn intentionally to protect a Democratic incumbent. Andy Harris, of course, is screwed, so he has no place to go here. Some of the more marginal Democratic districts, like this one, this is the reason why this is more marginal is because it takes in some of the more Republican areas around Bel Air and within Baltimore County. And Baltimore County used to be a Republican stronghold. I mean, you talk about some of the more traditional Republican suburbs in the American Northeast. Baltimore County really was an example of that, but now it is shifted rapidly to the left. It's a place where Republicans have lost a lot of ground, and Trump did considerably worse here than he did in 2016. And so you see some similar things to the current map. You can see that David Trone has this awful-looking district that extends into the rural red parts, the Panhandle. He's from Potomac, which is a very wealthy community in Montgomery County.
Mm-hmm. He's one of the richest members of the House. He basically self-funded his, and it was the same thing with Delaney. Delaney was one of the wealthiest members of the House.
Yeah, I think
these are clearly the right people to be representing counties that should be in West Virginia.
To be fair, both of them are fairly moderate as far as Democrats go.
Well, I know, but they
Delaney
just
yeah.
represent. They only represent the interests of their constituents in Frederick County. That's it.
Yeah, it's still very strange that Dan Bongino, of all people, almost flipped the 6th in 2014.
That would have been hilarious.
He could have represented right
He
next
almost
to DC.
won.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
almost
Dan
almost
Bongino.
won.
Yeah, I mean that's very funny. Yeah, I mean, why is this area united with Potomac and Bethesda, some of the wealthiest areas around here? I mean, I don't know. It's just the way it is. I think David Trone was with Total Wine before this, so I mean, he really, I think, is emblematic of the types of demographics we see around here. Baltimore split up. There's a district here. I mean, there are a lot of Republicans, or at least ancestral Republicans, who lived in these types of areas. But now it's united with Baltimore. I mean, there's no way a Republican can win here. That's just the way it is. It's an 8-0 map, and it'll hold throughout. And so, as I said before, some of these less blue areas are going the way of safely Democratic because they are in areas where Trump really underperformed his 2016 numbers. And I'll show you one more map that I think that really shows this. This is not a realistic map at all. But I decided this is going to be theoretically a fair map. I mean, I think a fair map in Maryland would be a 2 Republican, 6 Democratic map. This is a little bit generous for Republicans. But in all honesty, this district right here, which takes in the Western Shore, takes in a lot of Anne Arundel County, which is Annapolis, and then going south here, this would become a pretty swingy district. I mean, if you look at the actual numbers, sorry, it doesn't really help. I mean, if you look at the actual numbers of the 7th district right over here, I didn't really use any sort of numerical consistency here, but you can see Republicans won this by 15 in 2016. But this is as Trump barely lost Anne Arundel County. This is a Romney to Clinton county. Trump lost this county by 16 points this year. This is not a county that's coming back anytime soon.
It's an ancestrally Republican county. This is a county that used to be rock-ribbed Republican.
Yeah.
I mean,
look at these
even Annapolis had a Republican mayor in the middle of the 2010s. I mean,
yeah. I mean, yeah. So this is, I mean, in theory,
I have to head out. So if it's okay, can I show my map after Jared? Eric, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, of course. And I'm almost done, but like
that's fine.
See, with Anne Arundel, places like Glen Burnie, which are pretty wealthy suburbs and areas sort of along the Baltimore to DC corridor, these were some of the biggest shifts to Biden out of anywhere in the state. And Biden did really well here. So this is a district that would not be conceivable anymore because it would not be a safe Republican one anymore. So 8-0 map, that's just the way it is, unfortunately. Andy Harris is not going to be in Congress come 2023.
Yeah, so I hate the prospect of a unanimous Democratic map. So I drew a map that allows Republicans to potentially win 4 seats out of the delegation. So again, very compact. I didn't care about incumbency. There are 2 majority black seats here. District 4 is 70% black, and District 3 is actually an opportunity seat. Let's see. And obviously District 7 is going to be majority black, almost 70% here. So 1 and 6, safe Republican, as you can see. So Andy Harris gets to keep his seat, and David Trone is removed from office and kicked out. And then if we look at District 2 here, it was Biden definitely improved off of Clinton's margins a bit once we get accurate numbers. So these seats would range from probably likely Democratic in most cases, 2 and 5, to maybe occasionally leans Democratic. 2 is slightly more competitive than 5, but overall 2 and 5 should still be relatively successful in reelecting their incumbents. So Dutch Ruffensperger and Ruppersberger, and Steny Hoyer should be fine. So again, it pretty much, this is how it works. You've got at best chance Republicans get 4 seats, but they'd have 2 safe seats just in general. And if you look at the governor's race with Hogan, he actually manages to flip 8, but 7 and 4 because they've got such high black populations remain in the Democratic column.
Yeah, Prince, what's it called? Prince George's County. Is one of the most interesting counties. It's basically the Democratic stronghold in Maryland, and it's one of the most. It's a very heavily black county, but it's also one of the most affluent counties in the country. So it's a very important county for Democrats, and I think if Democrats wanted, the biggest risk to an eight to nothing map would be black Democrats from the DC metro wanting a third district. Right now, black voters have 2 VRA districts. You could make an argument that they deserve 3. Really, they're concentrated in those 2 seats and kind of split up into the Steny Hoyer seat.
I just
So I'll
wanted
go
to
ahead and
say
show.
thank you guys. So I'm head out now, but thank you for the
Yep.
episode. Thank you to our viewers, and I appreciate it.
Yep. And so
Thank
I'll
you.
go ahead and show mine. I actually have 3 maps. I'll pull one out of the trash, but this is the fair map. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the water precincts because I hate water precincts, and I'm not sure why I didn't get rid of them to begin with. Obviously, Maryland has a lot of water. It's a very coastal state. I think I've memorized where most of these water districts are. But yeah, this is a 6-2 map. This is pretty fair for Maryland at this point. Maryland is not a state where Republicans are doing very well in. And so this one right here, so obviously District 1 is very Republican. It basically draws in some of the few Republican or less Democratic areas of Montgomery County right here, and then also these parts of this county right here, and then also areas northern Baltimore County, or not northern Baltimore County. That goes into the first. I think Andy Harris is probably in a different seat in this map, but it really doesn't matter. And then you look at these other ones; they're all very Democratic. I mean, if you look at this right here, 4 and 7 are the VRA seats. 5 is Democratic. It goes from Charles to Annapolis. Although again, in the gubernatorial race, it's more interesting. Larry Hogan won by a large margin. He actually wins, obviously, a majority of seats. 8 is the competitive one, but he actually wins 5 by a pretty solid margin. So a good map for Republicans there. I have my gerrymander as well. This one was from. This is obviously designed to get rid of all Republicans and have no chance of a Democrat losing, so we don't get any damn Bonginos coming along. So this one is very, very, very bad for Republicans. If you look at it, it's gross. 6, all the incumbents are safe. All the incumbent Democrats, that is, all the Andy Harris is screwed. He would be in 2. 7 goes into Baltimore, and it's just really gross. I mean, it's just a disgusting map. Splitting the shore so many times. But again, this is going to collapse with the gubernatorial race because 4 and 7 are the VRA seats, but the rest of these are all, more competitive Republican-leaning areas in the gubernatorial race. Oddly enough, which again, Larry Hogan won in a fluke, and really it was part of a tax revolt. The reason why he won, there were some unpopular taxes that were passed by the governor and the legislature. I think the biggest one was a rain tax that was just very unpopular with suburban voters. So that's how Larry Hogan was able to win, and then he held on by basically just not rocking the boat, just being, a fairly normal, moderate Republican. His dad was well known for being one of the few Republicans who was against Richard Nixon, and then he is now known for being one of the Republicans who was against Donald Trump. But let's see if I can find my Republican version, because there's a Republican Maryland that I made that is just very gross and definitely shows you how packed Democratic voters are, because despite their advantage, you can actually you could draw a 4-4 map if I can find it.
Definitely.
5-3. I have I'll see if I can find this here, but you can draw a 4-4 map. It probably would have flipped some of the districts this time, but it's a very Maryland is definitely just a state where a lot of things in a lot of situations open up for Republicans to take advantage of them. I can't find this map, so I'm just going to go ahead and say I can't find it. But rest assured, it is possible. I've drawn it. You can draw about 4 Trump plus 8 seats, and then the rest of them there's 1 white seat and 3 majority black seats. But again, it's going to be an 8-0 map unless DC black Democrats rise up and decide they want a third majority black district, which is possible. It's very possible, but I doubt the Baltimore establishment that kind of controls the party will be willing to do that. So with that, we're going to close off this episode. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate your support. We're going to be coming back in future episodes, obviously, to talk redistricting. We have more exciting states coming up. I think the next one, we're really past some of these boring states, to put it lightly. The next state up would be Massachusetts, which is actually a really interesting state to draw, and then places like Michigan, Mississippi, other states along that line. So again, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on our next episode.
Awesome.